Love our sisters at Jazz. So I'm so glad you decided to join me this morning for this
Of
chat.
course.
Um, so, Ashley, you wrote an article a couple of days ago on how the current COVID crisis is basically putting Black hair care in jeopardy. And you wrote about it from numerous facets, like not just like what we do at home, but also like the Black hair care industry at large. Um, and you were really speaking, I think, to something that Black women know personally. Like, why did you write the article? Like, why was it important to kind of explore that aspect in the midst of everything else that's going on?
I think it was because I was seeing a lot of different, like, especially on Twitter, a lot of tweets kind of about, like, yeah, doing, like, cutting my bangs, like, kind of like very, like, I kind of described it as very, like, navel gazing kind of like tweets and articles about, like, oh, yeah, you can just get a Miley Cyrus, like, mullet, like a stylish mullet while you're in, isolation and all these kind of things. And I'm just like, I more power to him, but I just really can't relate to that. Like, if I took some scissors to my hair, I would be terrified. Like, you know, I think that there was just a piece about Black women, well, Black people in general, but specifically Black women and their hair that was really missing from this kind of discourse or conversation about like beauty um, during isolation, quarantine, etc. And I'm like, I know that some Black women are thinking the same thing I'm thinking right now, which is like, damn, I was gonna get my hair braided. What am I gonna do? It's kind of warming up out there. Like, or I know there's someone who rely on going to the salon every other week, and they won't be able to do that for the foreseeable future. So I'm like, let me talk to those women. Let me talk to the people who are in the industry, and let me see what their perspective is as we go through this crisis.
And of course, you did this incredible, well researched article. You had sources, you did everything we're supposed to do as journalists. And what was interesting to me as a reader is on one hand I felt really affirmed by your article. I felt, like I felt seen, like, yes, thank you. you know. Um but also then there was this incredible blowback in the comments, and a lot of it was centered around this idea that, people are dying right now, which is obvious and part of our daily reality and something I think we're all dealing with. Like, this is a very collective trauma, and I don't think anybody's in denial of that. But there was kind of this very shaming, like, how dare you tone about, how dare you talk about anything else than this horrible suffering that we're all going through. Even though I think that there is also a craving for non-COVID related content in this moment, especially knowing that we don't know when we're going to be normal again, or if we'll ever. I don't know that we'll ever be normal again after this. So can we talk a little bit about some of the comments that you got?
Yeah. So, I've been very kind of used to like not getting too into the weeds of the comments, like, right. I understand that they're part of the community of our community, Kinja and everything like that, but it's, you know, I got other stuff to do. I can't let my blood pressure get too high, But I thought that for the most part that the comments would be pretty like, not very aggressive or anything like that. I mean, I read about a lot about politics. I read a lot of like about Bernie Sanders. I'm used to like a lot of strife in those comments. I'm not used to people basically telling me like, why are you writing about hair? People are dying. This is so frivolous, or saying like, well, I'm sure like no like Black women on the front lines, like nurses or anything, care about their hair right now. And it's just like, I think that what was really a big eye opener to me is that, like, as someone who is Black and talks to other Black people in my family, my friends, who just, observe other Black people on Twitter too, like, I included in the piece was this very funny reference to, someone was very saying this in jest, but they're like, the beauty supply shop is a non essential service, like, stuff like that. Like, this is just kind of a part of our conversations that we have as we go through this process. And, I don't think that any Black people are negating the like trauma of what's going on, especially since it appears that Black people are being disproportionately impacted by the issue. We are terrified. But we're terrified, and we're also wondering about our hair breaking off, or wondering about for people who are not used to doing their own hair. They're usually that stylist they go to for like the past 10 years, and they don't know when they're going to see them again. And so this felt like very normal conversations in my community that I've had with family and friends. And I think the comments really kind of put a reality check on the fact that like there are people who do not think about this. There are people who not only don't think about this and think like, oh wow, that's like really interesting. It gives me more empathy for people in those situations. They jump to, I don't understand this. This doesn't matter.
Right. I don't understand it, therefore it doesn't exist even.
Right.
This idea of like your, your experience is irrelevant, your opinion is irrelevant. It was so, one of the things that really struck me, fellow Black woman, reading these comments, who managed to sneak into my hairstylist like days before we were on lockdown, and even then it's like, can you touch up these grays? Can you give me a chump? Like all this stuff, because it's like, you had this amazing little phrase in the article. You were like, a messy bun is like, that's not us. Like
the messy bun brigade cannot understand what's going on right now.
Yeah, our messy bun like is something totally different. And I think like
Right.
one of the things that it really drove home for me was this whole Du Bois would call it double consciousness, but this whole idea for us that is so much more loaded than just like, do I look cute? You know what I mean?
Right.
Like so much of our acceptability, our palatability in America in particular has always been framed around this idea of being groomed, always been framed around this idea that somehow we're unkempt or and as we've moved into this era of virtual meetings and, this is not a concern. It's like, I don't know why Vogue magazine can report on like, dressing from the waist up and we can't express those concerns as well. And also obviously hold it in not an equal space, but hold it in the same space that we're holding our own terrors about the safety of our families and our friends. And, like I can acknowledge that I have at least one friend in an ICU right now and also acknowledge that I'm concerned about how I look on my Zoom meeting in front of my boss, and my boss is Black.
Yeah, and like a few things on that. Like I know first of all, I just think it was going back to what you said about you have a friend on ICU. Like if we're talking about people on the front lines, like it's really doesn't go beyond. It's not hard to imagine that there is a Black nurse somewhere in America who is like worrying about not having enough protection at her job every day and worrying about the people who she's trying to help, the lives that she's saving, and also is kind of stressed out because she usually has her hair in braids, and that's one way for her to help her do her job because she doesn't have to have one other thing to worry about. And maybe she's concerned that she can't go to get her hair done. That's one other thing that she cannot worry about right now as she is like on the front lines helping fight this pandemic. And on top of that, I think it's just kind of, I try to make it clear in the piece that yes, it is loaded. Like, we do celebrate our hair, and it's fun to just kind of think about the ways in which like Black hair is just so versatile. It can just do anything we really want it to do if we have enough nerve and enough time. Yeah, right. It is, but it exactly. It's also fragile, but we can do all those things, and it's just kind of like. I guess that what it really kind of drove home for me was the fact that, I try to make it clear in the piece that, yes, racism is a part of why we are so obsessed with being like real groomed. Like, I think that sometimes we decided, like, we kind of think of it like, oh, yeah, like an endearing thing. Like the auntie is kind of like worried about how you like, how you're looking, or I kind of sometimes joke that even though I'm very low maintenance with my hair, that I still try to look presentable because I don't want an elder to be looking at me on the bus or train being like, she really came out of the house like that. It's little things like that that are definitely ingrained aspects of racism, but we still kind of adhere to, and we can talk about how that's a problem. I've talked about how that's a problem loads of times, but it's still the reality of the situation.
It is the reality, and it's right up there with like voting, for some of our communities. When we're talking about elders and this expectation of what you do and how you behave and how you present, Absolutely. And this is something I've been studying since I was in college. I did like a documentary on black hair long before Chris Rock was talking about it.
Oh my God.
And that I remember even then interviewing the generational divide in terms of how people felt about hair. And I remember very clearly my mother saying something like, well, some people just don't care. I mean, they'll just, go. I'm just like,
Right. They do what's contempt and what's not. And, and I kind of do touch on this in my piece too about how even when there's even like the natural community and like even when you kind of try to kind of do something that kind of pushes against beauty standards of having your hair straight and quote unquote groomed looking, there is still this hierarchy, even in natural hair, where it's like, I kind of compared to how there's like almost this, it's connected to this like moral objective that like if you don't do like 5 different kinds of like co-washes and like this kind of oil and this
yes.
kind of then like
I'm
how
ashamed
dare
to
you
say,
walk out.
as a beauty editor, I still don't know how to do a twist out. So yeah, I'm like right there with you. Like my twist out
These
game is not
professions.
popping, and it is a thing. And I think, yeah, I mean, even with
Guilty.
that, this whole idea of like natural natural to put it in terms that the mainstream might understand, like natural for black people, natural hair is the equivalent of like the no makeup look. Like, do you know how many products it takes to make somebody look like they have no makeup on and look fresh
Right.
and gorgeous and flawless? It's kind of the same principle in terms of like the upkeep, the maintenance, the health, the wash day, the detangling, the products. Like, there's a reason it's a $2 billion industry, as you pointed out, and there is a reason that it's so elaborate and it's spawned this entire. I mean, we can't even call it a cottage culture anymore in terms of the
No,
cottage
not
industry,
anymore.
rather. I mean, this is a huge industry of vloggers and advice and entrepreneurs and
Mm.
what you really speak to also is that this is not purely aesthetic; it's economic for our
Mhm.
communities. When you talk about how many black entrepreneurs really depend upon this particular line of work, this particular industry to make their livings. Um, and that's, I mean, obviously we know that, you know, hairstylists of all races are suffering right now. But I think, when you look at black entrepreneurship in particular, I mean, we just had the Madam CJ
Mm.
Walker biopic come out. Like, this has been a huge vehicle for black entrepreneurship for,
Yeah.
centuries at this point.
And I think it's also important to realize that, yeah, hairdressers and stylists across the board are suffering right now because they literally had to close up shop. They can't, go around doing what they normally do, like those glam squads. I don't know what's what they're up to right now, but hopefully keeping their distance and staying safe. But to that point, this stylist I talked to, this amazing woman named Brenda, who's a stylist out of Chicago. I talked to her, and she made the point that she's like, yeah, I was working until the state forced me to close up shop because if I count how many heads I do is how many bills I can pay. And but she made the point that she's like, I'm married. My husband still has a job. He still has income. I don't have to worry about this as much as a lot of other women, a lot of her other peers who I'm concerned might go out and still do, house calls or something to make ends meet. And I honestly, it's a dangerous situation, but we live in a country that doesn't have very good safety nets. You live in a country where you can't even get through to unemployment on the phone if you call. We live in a country where a lot of these women are depending on this income to survive, to feed themselves and feed their children. Like, this is not just going back to the fact this is not just about aesthetics. Yeah, some people still want to make sure they look good. Um, all of us do. I think that's very human, even in this time of crisis and pandemic.
In
Like,
some ways, I think people would consider it self-care as well. I mean, this
well,
is a
yeah,
form of self-care, and it's a form of trying to maintain some sense of normalcy in a deeply, deeply chaotic and abnormal and disturbing moment.
yes. And I think that the fact that, I mean, this just literally touches so many things. It touches um, how we see about what it means to be groomed. It kind of combats that. It touches just how we feel about ourselves looking in the mirror every single day. It also touches people economically, and that is also important. Like, I think that why I thought that I should write this is that this is touching a lot of different people in a lot of different ways, and at a time when you could have a billion articles about stress baking, about other quarantine activities and other things, and no one will like be like, people are dying. How dare you talk about your sourdough starter? No one's doing that. But the second I talk about like, yo, like there are Black women who are a little concerned about breakage, or a little concerned about how they're going to pay their bills, or a little concerned about, just other things I think a lot of people take for granted, all of a sudden, like, this is frivolous. People are dying. Literally, I think there was the thing I really didn't like in the comments, that there was almost this kind of sensationalism about describing, like, they're like, we're digging ditches for dead bodies, and like we have graves to like dig, and it's like, we know the seriousness of this crisis.
And who do they think will be digging those graves exactly?
What's going on? Huh?
I was like, who do they think will be digging those graves exactly? Because let's be really honest, when we talk about
in those graves, like, we are very concerned about this, but
Black people are dying at about what, six? I think in certain cities, I know here in Chicago, Black people are dying at 6 times the rate of their white counterparts. So this is definitely an issue that we're thinking about. I don't think anybody here is immune to a very profound, if not concerned, sheer terror about the potential of this virus touching their lives. And at this point, it definitely feels more like when than if, Yeah.
And in New York, I mean, if you look at the stats, disproportionately in the Bronx, Queens, and Brooklyn, like, these are populations that have a lot of Black people in them. These are people who are more predisposed to asthma, and for a lot of like other like economic and like health access reasons, have higher chances of having like diabetes, high blood pressure, all these things that make coronavirus incredibly dangerous. And so I think that what this really made me realize was that, I gotta say, I think that we need to, just for our own sanity, kind of step away from this idea that like talking about anything else in terms of the coronavirus, unless it's like death toll, is like petty and frivolous. We're all human beings with the capacity to understand and more and other like different things. Like, I saw someone saying like, yeah, I'm disappointed about my wedding being canceled, but you won't see me complaining about it. Like, I think that it's perfectly reasonable for you to complain about a wedding not happening during this time. I think we're human beings. We are able to be worried and frightened and upset about multiple things at the same time. And I think that denying people that denies them their humanity. And as a Black woman, to see people respond to me talking about hair, something that's very important to us, as if it doesn't matter, like, that's also negating me of my humanity during this very scary time. Like, let's all be a little bit more human with each other. I think that's the move.
I love it. If there's been any bright side to this, like, what do you think it's been?
I think that I really appreciate the fact that there were people who reached out and were like, I feel very seen right now. And who were like, texted me, people who DM'd me, people like tweeted. And also, there were people in the, comments at Jez who were like, yeah, I'm going through this too. I'm shocked by all the vitriol here. But I think that, especially seeing people who were like, yeah, I got to get to learning how to do two-strand twists, who are like, I'm going to miss those conversations. Look, I'm in the same boat.
Like the two-strand twist.
Right? I'm just like, this is not supposed to be hard. And like, there I go looking at some like YouTube video from like 2011 trying to figure out like how to, do it. But, there are people there was even one guy who reached out to me and was like, hey, like, his daughter is Black and he's like, she can't go to her, where she normally gets her hair done for the foreseeable future. I'm kind of feeling panicked. I don't really know what to do, but I'm going to like try to do what I got to do in this situation. He didn't have any tips. I'm like, look, I am the most low maintenance person ever. You got to go on YouTube and figure that out. But it did remind me that like, there are people who have this on their minds. And I think that validating these concerns and these thoughts, even if they do seem small in the grand scheme of things, is legitimate. This is something that Black women, Black men, Black non-binary people are thinking about right now. People can't go to their barbers to get a shape up either. I know my dad, he's old, so I'm just like, you cannot leave the house. But he's like, the barber shop. I'm like, no. So, this is something that the diaspora is just really, really thinking about on right now. It's on their minds.
Absolutely. We saw Lori Lightfoot getting her shape up the other day. So it is on our minds. It is on our mind. We're all trying to just do the best we can, I think. But
Yep.
thank you because you validated me and I appreciated it.
Oh,
All
I
right.
appreciate hearing that.
Stay good out here in these follicle filled streets.
I'm gonna try. Well, more like stay inside.
May we all master the 2-strand twist.
Right? No, look, we're gonna all come out of here like masters.
I know. We won't need
If I
We
do
won't need the beauty
cornrows-
industry anymore.
If I come out of this knowing how to do cornrows,
Oh yeah, you won't be able to tell me nothing.
oh no. Yep.